Hello everyone. I am Giray Hatipoğlu. I am founder of the Fire Research and Training Limited company based in Turkey. My company works on scientific research, mostly in astrophysics, and also provides trainings in remote sensing and time series analysis, as well as disseminate the cutting-edge scientific knowledge through social media and science ascent. But enough about me. Today we are going to interview Evgeny Smirnov. He has a very interesting background and is a very interesting person as well. He, he has a deep expertise in physics, psychology, and philosophy. He is also founder of 4XXI Software Limited, based in London, and Donova Software DOO, with bases in Barcelona and Belgrade, as well as he works as a psychological counselor, and he also works as scientific researcher in Astronomical Observatory of Belgrade. So, before our five questions in this interview, could you please talk about yourself a bit?
Yeah, so thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to talk today. So in general, I have many interests and that explains why do I research different fields. I always believed and still believe that it is unnecessary to limit oneself and myself in particularly to only one area. And as an example, many of you have heard about artificial intelligence and especially large language models. And in my opinion, this is a great thing and one of the most, let's say, amazing and inspiring advances in machine learning and technology for the last 10, 15, 20 years. However, as you can also realize, they have great potential not only in the business, but also in science, in different fields of science. And for example, why shall one limit oneself to, let's say, only the field of astronomy or only to the field of marketing and not to try to use the same technology in other fields, such as psychology. So therefore, yeah, I'm very passionate researcher in these fields, and I love both business side because it's very practical and pragmatic, and here you have to be very specific and achieve immediate results in order to keep everything running smoothly. But at the same time, academic career, astronomy, that's something which allows to do something fundamentally, which might not have some immediate results or some, let's say, implications right now. But as we all know, even, let's say, classical machine learning, it was invented a long time ago in reality. These statistical equations, formulas on which classical machine learning was based, they were created a long time ago. And without these fundamental researchers, without these mathematicians, we wouldn't have the world which we have today.
So, thank you very much for this introduction. I am actually quite moved about the difference between the very practical side of the private sector as well. So, I remember that the first time I entered in a private company, especially after like years of undergraduate and graduate studies, I was startled by the fact that like there are always problems and you just need to generate a solution which is almost always suboptimal, but it should work immediately. So I definitely get that feeling, and that's quite different and very exciting in its own way too. I think it will also work in my case as well to always include that part in my life. So we can we can move first to our first question. So you had a lot of works in psychology too, and you also consider the types of motivation like extrinsic and intrinsic ones separately. So how about the utilization of the large language models? What is your intrinsic motivation to use them?
Yeah, so that came from my psychological background. There was a very interesting theory of motivation, which is called self-determination theory, which was invented by Deci and Ryan, two famous researchers. And the main difference between these types of motivation is what brings it. So, for example, if let's say you work for hire and then you use your money, I don't know, to be able to travel a lot or to buy nice cars or to eat in restaurants. That's some sort of external motivations because you earn your money not because you like what you do, but because you want to buy something on them. So it's like you do something in order to get something else. That's extrinsic. Intrinsic, when you do something which you like to do, and of course, money are important, but your motivation, your primary motivation, let's say, is the actions you do. So in terms of LLMs, I have actually both types of motivation. So for sure, I have extrinsic motivation on studying LLMs because I use them a lot in my business activities. I use them a lot for my work activities. And for example, let's say if I compare my efficacy 3-4 years ago or 10 years ago with my efficacy right now, today I have like 10 times, I'm 10 times more efficient than 3 years ago because of the LLMs. For example, I have right now an interview, but in background, I have two agents that are running two different studies, two different research at the same time. One is OpenAI's Codex and another one is Claude Code. So it wasn't possible a few years ago. It is possible these days. And of course, it brings this efficacy. But in the meantime, I have, of course, some sort of intrinsic motivation in studying LLMs because LLMs, it's really something different. Psychologists haven't spoken about what is, psychology is a very interesting field because nobody knows what we are talking about. Nobody knows what we are doing about. For example, everyone knows the word personality or psyche or consciousness, but nobody actually knows what is it. What is personality? Okay, there are like 100 of different theories, and they define personality with 100 different definitions, but these definitions are different. I mean, one contradicts another. If you take a classical definition of personality by, I don't know, Sigmund Freud or by Carl Jung and compare it with, let's say, the definition of personality made by, for example, Gordon Allport, you will get totally different pictures. LLMs, in my opinion, these are the very first tools that behaves like our consciousness. Therefore, in terms of, let's say, fundamental psychology, they could help us a little bit understand who we are. And that's, there are like two very main questions. They came from a very famous series, Babylon 5. There were two different races that were asking constantly two different questions. One was who you are, and the second one, what do you want? So LLMs could help us answering the first question, who we are. And that's why I would say that I have this intrinsic motivation in researching that, as well as from, let's say, mathematical standpoint, my primary education is mathematics. I was always interested in mathematics and classical machine learning. So when LLMs arose, I decided that I have to learn that. So this intrinsic motivation is still with me.
That was very interesting. Thank you for this reply. A lot of things came to my mind, so I don't really know what to say to it directly. So I will maybe say it after some questions when it just takes a shape in my mind. So I will now directly follow up with the second question. So using LLM in another field, this time project management, especially considering the project management in the software development cases, we generally have agile project management process. Very briefly, it involves always considering how users will use this software, so trying to develop features and other stuff for this. So there is a concept of user story and then story points. These all tries to make the planning a bit standard and tries to give resource and time allocation, let's say. But it is, of course, a little bit ambiguous to decide about the story points, especially, and there are a lot of jokes and memes in the internet about this. So, how do you think large language models can help in this situation? Can they judge better, or can they do something else about it?
Actually, that's a long question because it requires to talk about multiple things. Of course, from at the first glance, we could plausibly say that LLMs could bring a lot of benefits to the project management field. For example, what some project managers do, they create user stories, they manage documentation. Okay, it interferes a little bit with product management. There is project management, product management, but in reality, I do not differentiate it a lot. I know formal differentiation, but for me, it's challenging to say that, okay, this guy is manager, he doesn't do anything about product, but this guy does everything about the product, but doesn't do anything about the management. So they interfere and overlap each other. But in reality, yes, LLMs could generate documentation, could generate user stories, and this is the helpful stuff. So, for example, a very simple approach which one might use and which I find useful is when, for example, I take some audio notes, and that's very easy with ChatGPT or Claude, and just tell ChatGPT, how do I envision a feature? And then ChatGPT generate documentation based on some templates or some instructions provided in advance in the form of a project, in the form of a prompt, whatever one utilizes. It's helpful because in, let's say, 15 minutes, I could get a pretty nice structured article that I could say, let's say, send to a developer, and it will be good enough to start the development. So definitely there is a room for optimization here. And I'm not talking about ChatGPT, who will write on my behalf this user story. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in such a way. It might work at some day in such a way, but it's hard to transfer all the context. So for example, when I make some decisions, when I write a user story or when I create a user story, I take into account a lot of things. For example, what is this project all about? What is the deadline? What is the capacity of the developers? What is the mental state of the developers? They might be overwhelmed with some tasks. Somebody might be on vacation. I take into account whether there are some holidays soon. I take into account the complexity of the code, whether it requires refactoring, etc. So there are so many different things that I take into account in order to make every concrete decision. Formally speaking, I could transfer this knowledge to ChatGPT. In reality, it's almost impossible, at least at this stage of technology, maybe at some day. So I would say that there is definitely a role for optimization when you embed LLMs into existing processes and figure out whether you could optimize this one, for example, or this one or that one. But in reality, when we return back to the project management field, what is project management all about? What are user stories? What are story points? I never got the point of why. I mean, I know the theory. I know why agile framework requires story points or might require story points, and why do they use story points instead of hours. But for me, all this argumentation is completely useless and broken. I do not see any differentiation between hours or story points. Okay, you might say that one developer will take this task in 1 hour and another one in 10 hours. But if you use story points, we could use some conversion rates, etc. Yeah, theoretically, you could do that. But you have to hire a special person who will accurately calculate all the story points, consider all other circumstances, because the developer might, for example, might be ill, and that's why his speed goes down, etc., etc. Maybe on some large volumes it will be average, but in reality, I've never seen a project where these story points could be calculated accurately. But in the meantime, if you ask me, okay, here's your developer, here's the user story, I could estimate how long it will take for this particular developer to build this user story and what are, let's say, the implications of that. So yeah, theoretically, ChatGPT could use StoryPoint, but the problem is that the idea of StoryPoint is completely broken, in my opinion, and therefore it's almost useless exercise. As well as ChatGPT could estimate the same task in hours. Sometimes it does this job very well, sometimes it does not. But again, there are too many, let's say, details, obstacles that ChatGPT cannot take into account. It can run a good scientific research in terms of the speed of the developer, but the real developer is far, far, far. It's like in astronomy, for example, when we calculate the orbit of an asteroid, we consider that all planets are either dots or spheres, and the asteroid is the dot without a mass. It works in multiple tasks, but if you would like to calculate, let's say, asteroid's orbit very precisely, you have to take into account its shape, for example, because of, let's say, Yarkovsky effect, for example. So therefore, the same for the developers. You have to take into account Yarkovsky effect on every developer in order to be able to predict the speed. So therefore, I don't believe that right now ChatGPT can do a good job on that. Maybe someday in future.
I mean, can we, for instance, say that since this task involves so much of a human or social concepts rather than the very abstract topics or technical topics, so it will be very hard to account for everything we should account while managing things. Allocating this to the outsourcing it to the ChatGPT or LLMs will be quite problematic rather than of some practical use.
Yes, because ChatGPT doesn't have enough data to perform this operation in the right manner. As soon as we somehow connect ChatGPT to ourselves, to our thinking, to our messages, to all our conversations, including private conversations, to all possible contexts, as soon as we do that, ChatGPT will be able to do that because it's not rocket science. In reality, project manager work is a very boring work because you serve like 50% of time as a let's say as a master, as a supervisor, and resolve very simple tasks like, hey developer, have you completed this task? Yes, I have completed. Why didn't you mark it as a completed? Okay, I will mark it right now. Okay, did you test this task? No. Why? It was written to test it. I didn't know what to test. Here are the test cases. They are linked. Please do that. So it's pretty boring work, and therefore I see no problem with ChatGPT replacing project managers at someday, as soon as we are able to provide this context.
Oh, yeah, thanks a lot. And speaking of the asteroids calculation, especially, we can move through the third question where it involves also a part of the research you are doing on the trans-Neptunian objects, mean motion resonance, and in general, calculating resonances and accelerating the scientific research, several parts of the scientific research process as well. Of course, we can use large language models or different types of large language models for the many parts of it, like literature review, paragraph summarizing, synthesizing some different parts of the outputs, etc. Also doing the number crunching part and stuff. But what do you actually think about utilizing for LLMs for different parts? And will there be any problem of utilizing LLM for a certain part so that we will decline our cognitive intelligence or competency because we keep outsourcing that part to the ChatGPT or LLMs?
I would say that at this state of art, we have to consider LLMs as tools. And like any tool, it has its pros and cons. For example, if you consider a knife, you can cut bread with a knife, but you can also kill a person with a knife. Knife is a dangerous tool, as well as an LLM. LLM is also a dangerous tool. So, for example, I use a lot LLMs, and I use a lot for creating some Python scripts to run some statistics or to create some modules for my packages. Uh, I can do that because I could validate what does it create. I could check Git status and the diff between, let's say, this commit and this commit. I can check, I can provide some instructions how to do that, etc. I could validate the outputs. I could create in advance some tests in order to do that. But many people cannot. And especially if you're talking about young students who try to optimize, let's say, their work. If they have a good, solid background in software development, if they understand a lot of the things, yes, of course, they could save some time and cut some corners. That's always appreciated. But if they learn how to code, that's not a bad idea. That's not the best possible idea to use ChatGPT for such a task because they wouldn't get these skills and they would be able to use this tool. Maybe it would be good enough at some stage to do everything without such a supervision. But for now, it is not. Sometimes it creates wrong pieces of code. Sometimes it creates fake references. In terms of, let's say, literature, I would also say that, okay, there are some formal parts where, let's say, you need to perform some overview, and you have no intrinsic motivation to do that because you have to do this because, I don't know, your professor said to do that and you don't want to do that. Or you have to write it for a manuscript and you really don't want to do that. Okay, use LLM, find out how to use RAG, how to verify sources, and you can do that. That's not rocket science again. But in the meantime, if let's say we are talking about a real researcher who is studying something new especially, if you rely on an LLM, you will lose the context. And many research are all about the context. You have to connect different ideas, different elements, different puzzles into a big picture. If you do not read articles, if you do not read books, you wouldn't be able to do that. It's like, for example, many people say that you don't need to know anything these days because you can Google it or ChatGPT this. That's true, but if you don't know anything, you don't know whether you need to search for something, whether you need to Google for something. So without knowledge, you cannot even understand whether you have no knowledge. It's like Socrates saying that I know that I don't know anything. And that's a good knowledge, actually. In any event, I would say that yes, as a tool, it could be helpful, but you have to understand its limitation, and you have to understand what do you lose when you use such a tool. I personally prefer to use it for some tasks where I really need to cut some corners, like for example, in terms of the mean motion resonances. It doesn't really matter that I worked on the resonances. What really mattered is I was working on image classification, let's say. And I had to use some classical algorithms to classify images. I got success on that, but it took a lot of my time, as well as it took a lot of my time on coding this stuff. With LLMs, I could perform this classification just by using one prompt and explaining in natural language how should be classified. Just in natural language, like if you have sinus, classify it 1. If you don't see oscillations, classify it as 0. That's it. So a simple prompt, 5 minutes work, and the classification is performed. And this classification was not the core of my research. I was researching other stuff. That was just a technical task inside of this stuff. That's why I believe for this particular task, the usage of LLMs is more than beneficial because I save time. I spend much less time on non-relevant tasks, and I achieve better results. That's a good deal.
So thank you very much. And you also replied the fourth question, specifically was on literature review. So I can just directly follow with the fifth question here right now. So when we consider using large language models, at the same time, it also generates outputs. It is also being used for making observations and trying to first trying to make use of the new observations, results, etc. So as a result, we are using it while we try to explore, why at the context where we don't have that information before. Like we put James Webb Space Telescope over there and it starts to see many things that the humanity will have never seen before, like unprecedented observations. And we started to see with the same thing with new observatories, new methods, new things as well. So how do you think LLMs performs when it encounters new things, and how much of a thing that can be used together with our own judgment, and what are the pros and cons?
I would say that LLMs, like humans, they generate text as well as we. For example, right now I'm generating text, and I'm generating it in my head. I'm generating it with my voice, but in reality, everything is text, at least in philosophical sense. LLM could make discoveries because discoveries are also a form of text. Uh, yes, of course, they are biased, as we all, and they could be biased, and they would be biased. I mean, the current LLMs are very hardly instructed for some sensitive topics in order not to be biased. But in reality, for me as a psychologist, it's really important because when I see an LLM, an uninstructed LLM, and how does it behave, I realize that this is our regular human behavior. Yes, we are not nice people. We are definitely not nice people. We think bad things about other people. We do not like many other people. And we might say to ourselves that, no, 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 we have to be kind, blah, blah, blah. But reality is reality. And the LLMs have demonstrated that we are not so nice as we originally were thinking. And that's a good knowledge, because when we know that, when we realize that, when we are aware of that, we could either make ourselves better, or we could accept that and at least be sincere. That's also, in terms of psychology, a good and valid point. I would say that here we have to wait until strong artificial intelligence arrives. I believe it shouldn't take long to get the first signs of real intelligence, real strong intelligence, what is called AGI. As soon as we get it, I believe it could drive our research much faster, because in this case, it will, but in general, it will be biased, but it will have an opportunity to overcome this bias, to surpass these biases, and therefore get another perspective from a different angle. But that's why I believe it's really interesting to live these days, because such I never imagined that could I could be alive together with real artificial intelligence. Now I hope that I will be still alive in order to talk with somebody who is not a human being.
Yeah, that's actually quite an exciting time. I mean, making real conversations with in silico beings rather than some natural beings. So I will also look forward to that artificial general intelligence myself. So I think we are quite short on time. So as a last thing, maybe you can make a last remarks, or you can make you can say something as a last word or so of this interview.
I would say that we human beings, we are always interested in how something is organized, what is the world. We were very interesting people. We were interested in almost everything. We had passion to discover the world, the universe, and the nature of laws. And that's something that we should keep in our heart and continue using that. We shouldn't be afraid of technology. It's dangerous, like atomic bomb was dangerous, like nuclear power was dangerous, as well as other stuff before that. We have to grow quickly. We have to grow mentally and physically quickly in order to stay alive. But if we do not follow this, let's say, growth, we might lose our intrinsic property, our passion to discover new things. Okay.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much for the listening audience as well.